Chris McEvoy, and I teach Entrepreneurship 200 and 310, two classes in 310, and then one class in 200. And those are the two core requirement classes to get the certificate in entrepreneurship. Anybody here involved in the certificate program? You are? Good. You look familiar, are you?
Yeah, you'll be 310.
Okay, good. Well, you be sure and keep me straight here. All right, well, we're going to talk about, there were really three things on the agenda. One was business models, customer discovery, and customer development. But it seemed necessary to really talk about the startup environment because that has undergone some really major changes in the last 7 years. And Purdue is really somewhat at the forefront of keeping up with those changes, so we're pretty proud of that. So let's just jump in. Tell you about me, first of all, so you get a context for where I'm coming from. This may evoke spitballs being thrown, but I'll take the risk. I have an MBA from a school in southern Indiana by the name of IU, and I am now a tried and true Purdue fan, and I tell people because every month I get a check from Purdue, and every month I get a solicitation from IU who wants me to spend the Purdue check on making donations. So I'm kind of a Boiler fan now. Well, anyway, I left with an IU and went to work for General Motors. And the back when is referring to back when General Motors was the world's largest corporation. That is no longer true today by a long shot. They were in a bankruptcy at the time of the big recession, and so it's not nearly what it was then. I spent 5 years there, look back on it as a very, very helpful and productive time, and left to form a software company at the age of 29. And one thing that I don't know why I was smart enough to know this, but as I began to form a company, I was determined to hire people smarter than me. So, and that paid off very well. I like to talk in terms of an unfair advantage, which is just, another term for value proposition, which you'll see a little bit later. But I had an unfair advantage that was very fortunate. It came to me while I was at IU, not at IU, while I was at General Motors. And I can go into that a little later if you'd like. Company was financed by banks, angels, and venture capital firms over a 17-year period and grew to 70 million in revenues, 350 employees. Boy, that's a lot of people. It really is. And an international marketing footprint. We were purchased by an international financial company, Swiss Reinsurance, that is the second largest reinsurance company in the world. I stayed on for a couple years and then moved on. Founded other businesses, some were successful, some were failures. And I would tell you that looking back, I don't for a moment regret that my first venture was successful. But having your first venture grow to that size and be a success can be a burden because once you're ready to do something else, you haven't been through a failure phase. And so therefore, it's easy to think of yourself, as I did, as being a lot smarter than you really are. So the lessons came a little tougher having had a success under my belt than having had a couple of failures maybe earlier in the game. So don't get discouraged if you have a failure because almost everybody does, and that's where you really learn. That's where you really begin to figure out what's going on. And then about 10 years ago, I started a consultancy called Wingspan Thinking, working with small businesses who are interested in growing rapidly. I also, about the same time, became a mentor with an organization called SCORE. SCORE is sponsored by the Small Business Administration in part. It's available for really any U.S. citizen to come into the office or through email to ask questions or ask for help on any subject. So it's really a wide open resource, and it's free of charge. And it is a volunteer, something you don't get paid to do. I don't get paid to do. I began teaching about that same time. I had never taught a day in my life in Purdue's entrepreneurship program, because I had a phone call from our program director who said, I've seen your resume and I think you might be a good fit for our program. And I said, where did you get that from? Because I wasn't aware one was floating about. And she said, I can't tell you because I don't know. It was just in my stack of stuff, and it finally came up to the top. So I came up here and sat down and talked, and I was just enamored with it. I thought it was just a fabulous program and just a great idea. And so I've been doing this now for 10 years. Stro Brand, who also teaches in our program, will be the speaker next Wednesday, and he's very talented. He and I revamped the curriculum in the second course, ENTR 310, to reflect agile and lean methods. How many of you have heard those terms? Okay, a few of you. Well, we're going to talk a little more about it. Our program has grown to be one of the largest of its kind in the U.S., and we don't belong to any school or college at Purdue. When this was set up by our president 2 presidents ago, Martin Jischke, he did not want this to be a course that belonged to any school because he wanted it to be open to every student at Purdue who might wish to commercialize an idea, which was a brilliant move for a lot of reasons. One is it gives us tremendous diversity of the people in class. And typically in our student reviews of the class, they talk about how important that diversity was. Everybody's on a team for the team effort, that getting people who aren't cookie cutters of everybody else was really very important in coming up with better ideas and better plans. So we kind of celebrate that. So any questions about me? And believe me, we'll get the dull stuff out of the way. The question that I would hope you would ask would be, what was the unfair advantage? And I said I'd tell you later, so I'll tell you now. At General Motors, I was in the IT department. I was a programmer, and that was back in the days when businesses trained their own IT people. The colleges weren't doing it yet, and so it was wonderful on-the-job training. And I felt I really got a very good education because there was pressure to be productive. And so about halfway through my 5-year stint there, they brought in a new IT software development platform. And it did a whole bunch of stuff for you that you used to have to do yourself. And a lot of people initially got kind of put out by that they felt that they could do it better than a stupid software program could do it. And maybe thanks to my MBA training, as I began to appreciate that it was faster, cheaper, and better. And then as I began to think, I'm really not cut out to work for a huge company. What am I going to do next? And a thought occurred to me that find an industry that is still using 10-year-old development tools and develop software using what they had brought into General Motors. and to give them the ability to be a lot more efficient and to get on the street more quickly with new products. And so that's what I did. And so it just hit at the right time, and we found an industry to get into, the insurance industry, and everything just sort of clicked into place. But believe me, it wasn't, the line is never like this. The line is always like this. It's a twisted piece of spaghetti. But that's just the way it is. Okay, so let's talk about business models. This is a very acclaimed template for a business model. By definition, a business model is how a business makes money. Raw and simple. And if a business, other than a nonprofit business, if a business isn't really committed to making money, chances are they're not going to be willing to do the tough things that will allow them to stay in business. So it's a pretty important concept. This came out of a book called Business Model Generation, which is a paperback book co-authored by 470 people all around the world, and it's just packed full of information about ideation, about organization, the business model canvas. It's a wonderful resource, and it's also very inexpensive, under $40 for a new copy of it. So anyway, if you look up here, the business model consists of 9 buckets, if you will. Key partner, well, let's start in the middle where you really do want to start. Value propositions, which I like to call the unfair advantage. And the whole point of that, I think I caused the screen to shift. No, I didn't.
So of the 3 lectures we've had in here so far, every speaker has touched the screen and accidentally gone to the next slide.
Well, we all teach over in 3154, and we have the drop-down screens. You can touch it all you want, and nothing's going to happen. So anyway, this is kind of new. So anyway, key partners, well, let's start over here. Value proposition. So this is your reason for being. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And then the right-hand side represents things that contribute to revenue, which is at the bottom. The left-hand side represents things that are going to cost you money. And so it's divided into that way. Now, what's brilliant about this, you'll notice value proposition, customer segments. That's who are you going to sell this to? So you better know who those people are that you intend to turn into customers. And so you begin that way. You then talk about, what's my relationship? How am I going to keep in touch with them? What's my path to keep them updated on what the company is doing? That type of information. And then channels would be distribution channels. Are you going to be selling direct to the public? Going to be going through retailers? Who knows? But all of these things are important to know because it's going to affect how you set up your company. And then you'll notice we have key partners, and that very much could be, aligned with the customer relationships or your channels. You have key activities. A software firm obviously has to have activities in terms of producing and testing code, stuff like that. Key resources, and this would be if you have, well, for example, if you were going to patent an idea, that might certainly be a resource that you'd want to look at because it's very expensive to do that. And then a cost structure, which is basically the cost side of the business, as well as a revenue stream. Hopefully, this is bigger than that because that means you're making money. So anyway, the other thing that this can be used for, let's first of all show you an example. Well, this is a kind of a tag along to that, which is basically some descriptions of what might go in each of these boxes. How do we get, keep, and grow customers? Who are our most important customers? What key resources do our value propositions require? So, you know, stuff like that. So this is kind of giving you some thought provokers about how to fill out the blank form for your own idea. So let's look at a real idea. And this is, how many of you have heard of Car2Go? Anybody? Okay, well it's like, I think even something in Lafayette is similar, but it's where cars are made available on the street for people to rent. And Car2Go was started by Daimler, which is a German firm, and they manufactured what they called the smart car, which is this little 2-passenger vehicle. And so they are using the smart car in their Car2Gos. And they're parked, they're not given, they pay for space on the streets of Indianapolis, or whoever it is that's providing this service in Lafayette, same thing. And you can come and you can see that you are going to pay 27 cents a minute to use that car. It's got fuel in it. You can basically go anywhere you want. It's going to cost you 27 cents a minute. And the customer segments, city dwellers. I added commuters who come into a big town by train, but sometimes need within the town to go visit clients. And it can be cheaper to do it this way than to do it using taxis. So you can see the key resources, key activities, the value proposition, urban mobility without car ownership, so key. And the key partner is city management. You know, it's up to the city to license it and cooperate with it, provide space, make a deal that the company can make money with. So anyway, there's really no great trick about it. You just have to be somewhat thorough. And then let's take it one step further. Let's say that maybe a year goes by, 2 years go by, and somebody is floating a theory that, you know, we're getting a lot of pushback on just a 2-person car. And we think there could be opportunity if we could offer a 4-person car in addition. So let's go back to the canvas and see how it helps you make those changes. Well, first of all, you start with the value proposition, which is provide an option for larger cars holding 4 passengers. And then everything in red represents things that you need to think about. And I think if we spent some time, we could fill in a lot more. And the beauty of this is that it keeps all this in front of you on one piece of paper and make sure you don't load up how we're going to have additional customers, additional products, and forget about what's this going to cost us to do that, because that's critical. Any questions or thoughts about that? Apparently not. All right, let's go. So the startup environment. There's a triumvirate of people who were very much involved in setting up this new paradigm for how you work with a startup business that dates back to about 2010, 2011. And that's been in use ever since. Steve Blank is the one who's probably the most prominently known. And so you'll be hearing about him. Agile development is a term engineers use, or a term anybody uses, that talks about cutting a big project into very small pieces and immediately taking a small piece, going out and validating with potential users, would you buy this? Is this what you want? And the process of doing that is, and remember, against that business model, is to pivot, is to make pivots. If somebody says, you know, I like what I see, but if it would do, I would really like it. Well, that's what agile development is all about. So suddenly you've kind of pivoted here, you pivoted there, you pivoted here, and you've ended up with something that people agree, yeah, this sounds good. So then you go on to the next small piece, and you keep building the product doing that, just like rings of a tree. And the advantage of that over saying, let's design this whole grand scheme, the problem is you have pivoted through each of maybe 30 different pieces, whereas if you design something that is the entirety, you're not going to have that level of granularity. And by the time you take it out to the public, you may find it doesn't like it because you hadn't been through a process where you could learn as you went what people wanted. And that's really the key here. So at first, agile development, first this comes from an article in the Harvard Business Review in May of 2016, so a year and a half ago. And it was saying that agile development kind of got its feet in the information services area, in information technology. And initially the thought was it really wouldn't apply to manufacturing. Well, it was so successful in engineering or in information technology that people began to think, wait a minute, there ought to be a way we can harness some of these benefits for ourselves. And so this is actually a quote from the HBR. Improve quality and speed to market, and boosting the motivation and productivity of IT teams. So it's no longer true that this is for information services only. That mold has been broken. And now, and again, this is quoting the Harvard Business Review, producing benefits that are a radical alternative to command and control style management, which is sometimes called waterfall development, where you plan the whole thing out and then in very discrete steps you do different things. You code it, you test it, you do this, you do that, you manufacture it, you take it to the marketplace, and you hope somebody buys it. Very risky, very expensive. And John Deere is using them to develop new machines. And we'll look into what that means. They had an example of developing a working prototype of a new machine form, which they didn't further describe, in 8 months. And the project director said, if everything went perfectly in a traditional process, it would be a 1.5 years at best, could be as much as 2.5 to 3 years. So look at the productivity difference here. And then look what else happened. Team engagement and happiness. You know, we want everybody to be happy. That helps productivity. In the unit quickly shot from the bottom third company-wide to the top third. Quality improved. And then, but wait, there's more. Part of the term sprint with agile development is actually then doing the work. And the sprints are very often divided into, they're very often accomplished, designed to be accomplished in a very short period of time, like maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But it's get on it, get it done, get it tested, move on. And so the velocity, which is the amount of work accomplished, increased on average by 200%, meaning it doubled However, some teams achieved 400, one team achieved 800, 8 times as productive. And you know, you think about, now we're talking about people and a good quantity of people, and you think about the implication of being more than twice as effective as you were, and that is money that goes right into profits. And so it's no wonder that major companies are pursuing agile and lean development. It's a matter of money, and it's a matter of time. They can be on the market much quicker. And so the origins of all this, which I mentioned before, is Steve Blank, who wrote a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which in essence is customer discovery and customer development. And a man by the name of Eric Ries, who was a student of Blank's, wrote a book called The Lean Startup, where he basically said agile development is just as apropos to manufacturing companies as it is to software. And then the business model canvas, and all 3 of those coming together ended up being the Lean Launchpad. And so it's a methodology now that is being taught all over the country. I'll show you a little more about that. Blank taught the first class at Stanford University in 2011, and our department sent all of our faculty out to Stanford in 2012 or 13 to go through his course during the summer. And it was an eye-opener. It was really great fun. We had already discovered it, and so it wasn't new to us, but you could see that it was something that's time had come. And then since that time, it's come a very long way. Back in 2013, Blank had an article in the Harvard Business Review, Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything. And basically it talked about how it was being adopted by many large corporations and particularly many government organizations. The National Science Foundation came to Blank and said, we need your help. We want you to teach the people applying for grants the Lean Startup method because they're not as efficient and as effective as they could be. And Blank said, well, I'll put that on my calendar and see if I can get to it next year. And they said, no, we need this in 90 days. So he thought, So he did. He jumped in and developed a program that was called I-Core. The I stands for innovation, for the National Science Foundation, and they began putting people into it as a test and then watching the results. And the results were such that by 2015, they mandated that anybody receiving a government grant through the National Sciences Foundation had to go through this program. No questions, they just had to do it. And that says 1,000, the number now is 1,600 teams of scientists have taken the program, and it's being taught in 50 universities. So they've got 50 universities in the US that are a place these scientists can go to learn this. Well, and then the Department of Defense and the intelligence community also approached Blank and said the same thing. And so they have adopted the model, for example, hacking for defense, and it's how you use the lean startup tools in terms of IT that affects defense, and even not more than IT, anything, weapons systems, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, it's really spreading pretty rapidly, only because it's been proven as a very, very effective way to get the job done.